You're locked up in one of the worst prisons on earth. Miserable doesn't even begin to describe it. You want to lie down and forget this nightmare, but there's no space. It's so crowded you can't even sit. You're shoulder to shoulder with other inmates. This has to be illegal, right? Good luck filing a complaint. There's no warden here who cares, and definitely no manager you could speak to. The most disturbing thing, this isn't the worst prison you're going to encounter on this episode of the Infographic Show. Prisons that are worse than death. Number 10. As a visitor to Mumbai, you probably shouldn't have shoplifted, but you kind of figured that you would just be given a ticket and let go. But from the looks on the faces of the guards as they haul you into the prison transport van, that doesn't seem likely. You are headed, along with just about all the ne'er-do-wells in the city, to Mumbai Central Prison, also known as Arthur Road Jail. This is the most famous prison in India, as well as the most notorious. Built in 1926 and dating back to the British colonist era, it is a massive 2-acre complex. And in many ways it feels like it hasn't changed since it was built. Crowded into a heavily developed area of Mumbai, it's located by 3 different rail stations and plenty of housing. Mumbai is one of the most population-dense cities in the world, and the jail mirrors this. It's one of the most overcrowded jails in the world. Originally built to hold 800 inmates, it currently holds close to 2,900. While it had some new barracks added to alleviate the crowding a little, the place still has a massive combination of overcrowding and violence, all in a chaotic setting. And you are about to be thrown right into the middle of it. You can hear shouting and threats being hurled as you're taken in through the door, but they're probably not toward you. The prison is infamous for being a hub of gang violence, and clashes are extremely common. In 2006, a brawl between gangs ruled by 2 feared criminals broke out, and the prison eventually responded by housing rival gang members separately. While things may have calmed down slightly, the crowding in the prison means the guards can't really keep everything under control. So who is housed here? How about everyone? Mumbai Central Jail houses just about every major accused criminal in the city, which means petty thieves like you will be housed alongside gangsters and even far worse criminals. In 2010, Mustafa Dosa, the mastermind behind a series of terror blasts in the city, clashed with a gangster and led to one of them being wounded with a sharpened spoon. The violence has continued, with the overstuffed jail regularly overwhelming its understaffed guards. So you can guess that this isn't gonna be the Ritz. And you have no idea how right you are. You're only gonna be here until you see a judge and pay a fine, which means your only real job is to keep your head down and survive. But that won't be easy. You're shoved into an overcrowded cell, the floors are dirty, the water tastes funny, and half of the inmates are coughing. The meals are regular, but very small and not particularly filling. You notice some of the inmates slipping money to the guards, which is probably how they manage to avoid some of the worst of this place. Your court date can't come soon enough. They say hell is other people, but it can also be isolation. Number 9. You are one of the worst, and everyone knows it. There's not a prison around that can hold you, and not a prisoner or a guard that isn't afraid of you. So you're not surprised that you've been transferred again. It's pretty much a regular event for you. But as your transport rolls down the roads of Fremont County, Colorado, you start to get a sinking feeling in your stomach. Because you're not heading to any ordinary prison, you're heading to ADX Florence, the most infamous supermax prison in the United States. And once you go in here, you are not coming out. ADX Florence is a federal prison known as the end of the line. The vast majority of inmates here aren't getting out. Most are serving life sentences or waiting to die on death row. It houses some of the most high-profile and infamous inmates in the United States, including mass shooters, terrorists, and drug kingpins. You're almost honored to be among those numbers, but you know it's going to come with a lot of negatives. In your old prison, you were the terror of the yard, and every inmate who came across you knew to give you your due. But that won't be the case here because you won't be seeing the outside world much at all. The main thing to know about ADX Florence is that its security measures are amongst the tightest in the country. The criminals housed here have either proven themselves a security risk at their old prisons or are dangerous enough to be sent directly here. They spend up to 23 hours a day in their cells, being let out only for brief supervised exercise for less than an hour a day. But if you're excited to meet some of your fellow killers in this exercise hour, don't get your hopes up, because you might be here for years and never interact with another inmate. You'll get out of your cell for a short period each day, but exercise typically consists of being in an individual outside cage, supervised by 2 guards. You might see another inmate in the distance and you can guess what they're in for, but just about everything else, including meals, will be done in your cell. and any attempt at escaping or resistance will be met with harsh treatment from armed guards, because as bad as this place is, it can definitely get worse. And you don't want to find out what the punishment cells are like. ADX Florence might actually be one of the less violent federal prisons out there because the inmates have no opportunity for violence, but that doesn't make it any less of a hellish place to be. Here, every day is the same. You won't see anyone besides your jailers. It's easy for time to slip away here and for people to lose their last bits of hope and resistance. And that may be exactly how the jailers want it, because the worst of the worst are a lot easier to contain when they don't have any hope for release. It's enough to make you wish for chaos, but be careful what you wish for. Number 8. Traveling to Colombia is a dicey thing in the best of times. The country remains in an ongoing state of tension due to a cold civil war between left-wing rebels and right-wing government supporters. A left-wing current government hasn't changed that dynamic much, and both sides have been responsible for terrible crimes. And when they get caught, they go to one place, La Modelo, the largest prison in Bogota, housing 11,000 inmates, and that's where you're going, as a guard. But as you're given orientation, you think you might have bitten off more than you can chew, because this isn't a prison so much as a war zone. La Modelo has one of the strangest setups of any prison you've ever seen. It's not really one prison, it's two. The north wing of the prison contains left-wing rebels, while the paramilitary forces of the right wing are housed in the south wing. Both groups are violent, ready for conflict, and housed in numbers that could easily overwhelm the guards. So naturally, the guards don't carry weapons. Now that might seem counterintuitive, but the fear is that the inmates could seize the weapons and become a bigger threat. So the only guns are found in the watchtowers. But that doesn't make you feel any better about entering those doors. The strangest thing about the prison is that the interiors of each wing are largely self-sustaining. As they're ideologically uniform, the inmates run the prisons and even used to run businesses like restaurants inside. More menacingly, they conduct their own military training exercises and have access to weapons through smuggling. It almost sounds peaceful, but there is one big exception to this, because there's an area between those two wings, and it's a no man's land. La Modelo has been home to some of the most infamous violence in Colombia's history, particularly in 2000. A peace pact between the two sides was broken when the corpse of a paramilitary leader was found. While the authorities were investigating, a conflict broke out between the two sides. The result was a 12-hour battle, an extended lockdown, and over 100 killed. This was what led to the National Police of Colombia finally entering the prison and trying to impose order. And that order is what you're here to ensure. Today, the severely overcrowded and unsanitary conditions in the prison are well known, and both sides are still largely allowed to control their territory as long as they don't attack the guards. But the guards can be a problem as well, with many being corrupt and making deals with one gang leader or even both. And you know that at any time, the neutral territory between the prisons could once again explode into a violent gang war, with you right in the middle. But hey, it's better than being a political prisoner, right? Number 7. Turkey is not a place to mess around. Under the leadership of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the country has leaned hard into authoritarianism, and he has doubled down on it after a coup attempt. And those who cross him are likely to wind up in Diyarbakir Prison, a large cell block housing around 700 inmates, at least on paper. Really, it's usually overcrowded and packed with as many political prisoners as the Turkish police have rounded up lately. You're not sure what you've done to wind up here, but you're sure you'll find out. Because at Diyarbakir Prison, the cell is just the start of the punishment. The prison was first established in 1980 and transferred to federal authority after a coup attempt. But it's not just any prisoner you'll encounter here. Just about every inmate here is accused of political crimes, and that means the government has a special interest in them. In many countries, the overcrowding is just the result of the country's conditions, but here the lack of sanitation and medical care is potentially deliberate, seeking to break the inmates and get them to confess. But if that doesn't work, the prison has other ways. The prison is known for being one of the worst human rights violators around, using torture and beatings extensively in interrogations. Inmates who have survived report being beaten, stripped naked, blindfolded, and sprayed with a hose. Prisoners have been dragged by their hair and even threatened by dogs. Humiliation is also a key part of the abuse here, with inmates being forced to salute the guards' dogs. Other more extreme tortures were reported, like hanging by the arms, in a scene straight out of a medieval dungeon, or electric shocks. And naturally, some of that goes very wrong. Diyarbakir Prison has a long history of incidents resulting in the death of inmates, most famously a 1996 event where guards stormed the prison and killed 10 inmates, wounding 46 others. The prison insisted that the guards were justified, but the investigation went all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. The court found that there was no evidence that the level of violence amongst the prisoners justified the overwhelmingly violent response. In total, dozens of inmates have died here over the years. And the most terrifying thing about this prison is you don't know how to get out. Political prisons play by different rules than others, with the accused having fewer rights to due process. You're accused by the state. They know what you're guilty of, but you might not. And even if you confess, things might just get worse. The prison is particularly notorious for its treatment of the Kurdish minority in Turkey, which has been agitating for independence for decades. And as Erdogan steps up his oppression of dissident groups in the country, it's likely this prison will only get worse. And there is no political prison more infamous than this next one. Number 6. You were picked up on the battlefield. You didn't know or care about the larger implications of the battle against the United States. As a young Afghani man, your duty was to defend the homeland. But now you're in the custody of your hated enemy, and you're in transport to the place where they hold the highest security prisoners of war and suspected terrorists. But you're not going to the U.S. mainland. You're going to Guantanamo Bay, the U.S.'s prison on the coast of Cuba, and you won't be leaving for a very long time. Guantanamo Bay is one of the strangest prisons in the world. Not only is it a U.S. prison located in a foreign country, but it's located in an enemy country. The U.S. has had frosty at best relations with Cuba since the communist takeover in the 1960s and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The U.S. actually attempted to invade Cuba, but the mission failed and left them with only a tiny slice of the island, where they built the prison and then never let go. And today, it's nearly empty, but for a long time it was the most feared location under U.S. control, because it exists outside of the U.S. judicial system. Everyone in Guantanamo Bay is a suspected terrorist or associate of enemy armies. This includes some of the most infamous terrorists in American history, including al-Qaeda ringleader Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who played a key role in planning the 9/11 terror attacks. But at its peak, it also held hundreds of lower-level al-Qaeda associates, Taliban, and Iraqi soldiers, and plenty of people who claimed to just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they all wanted their day in court. But for some of them, that day would never come. Under a military order in November 2001, the government began detaining these foreign nationals indefinitely, and at its peak in 2003, the prison held over 680 inmates. While the prison was run by the U.S. military and didn't use torture as a policy, there were plenty of reports of interrogations that got out of control, with detainees being waterboarded and beaten, and their pleas for release fell on deaf ears. The Obama administration initially wanted to charge Mohammed in civilian court in New York, but those plans went nowhere, and for some, the limbo still drags on. Over the years, the prison was heavily depopulated, with most of the detainees, who have been there for over a decade in some cases, being released back to foreign countries that were willing to take them. 9 inmates had died in custody over the years, and 15 still remain in Guantanamo Bay, most of them the highest priority detainees who have little to no chance of ever seeing the light of day again. And for now, the fortress on the southeastern tip of Cuba maintains its menacing presence. And sometimes, it takes only one event to turn a prison into a nightmare. Number 5. Welcome to Rwanda, where the prisons were always intense. Many of the jails in this war-torn African nation were built in the early 20th century, and inmates faced outdated conditions, small cells, and high heat in the summer. And in the city of Kigali, one of the most infamous prisons is Gikondo. This jail played its part in the city for decades, containing everything from petty thieves to murderers. Designed to house only a few thousand inmates, the prison has struggled to contain the sheer volume of people pushed through its gates over the years. And then came the biggest crime in Rwanda's history. You're not going into this prison at normal times, because there haven't been normal times in Rwanda since the 1990s. That's when the Rwandan genocide took place, as the dominant Hutus carried out a campaign of mass killing against the Tutsis. The best estimates are that as many as 800,000 people died, although some sources claim up to 1 million. And in the aftermath, there were many calls for justice. In the end, tens of thousands of Hutu militia ringleaders were convicted of crimes and sentenced to extensive prison time. And they had to go somewhere. If you're heading to Kigali's Gikondo Prison now, you're in for a bad time, because the prison that once held several thousand people had to be expanded to hold as many as 50,000, many of them guilty of genocide. This makes it one of the most overcrowded prisons anywhere in the world, as the cells can have dozens of people in them. This makes it impossible to get a good night's sleep, as there often isn't room for everyone to lie down. This means that many people may be forced to try to sleep leaning or even standing, and it only gets worse from there. Gikondo and a similar prison, Muhanga, are also known as some of the most unsanitary prisons in the world. There are no bathrooms in the cells, so prisoners are required to use often disgusting communal latrines. This has led disease to spread like wildfire in the prison, with skin infections and respiratory ailments being among the most common plagues. And if someone needs more serious medical attention, good luck. The prisons are massively understaffed. So it's no surprise that tensions are running high. An overcrowded prison is a powder keg to begin with. Now imagine an overcrowded prison where everyone knows that your fellow inmate might be responsible for the worst atrocities in your country's history, with the majority of inmates being guilty of genocide-related crimes. There's a sense of suspicion and hatred that filters through the prison. All of this has led to the prison getting a lot of notoriety, so much that the International Red Cross has been advocating for reform. But as of 2020, the prison continued to fill up, reportedly with plenty of petty criminals being shoved in there with the war criminals. But there might be one country that prisoners fear more than any other. Number 4. Being arrested in Russia is a terrifying prospect. The dictatorship is known for its harsh treatment of foreign civilians, particularly Americans, hoping to exchange them for Russian prisoners with serious crimes on their ledger. In the past, celebrities have been arrested for minor drug offenses, and journalists have been arrested on espionage charges considered to be trumped up by many. And Russian police are known for frame-ups. But no matter the cause, the odds are anyone arrested in Moscow is heading to the same place, Butyrka Prison, a facility dating back to the 17th century. And it's your first stop on a journey into hell. Butyrka Prison is a pre-trial detention facility primarily, but that doesn't mean it's likely to be an easier destination. The prison holds just about every kind of inmate you could imagine, and protective custody is the furthest thing from anyone's mind. That means someone arrested for minor drug offenses could be sharing a cell with a notorious gangster or a violent criminal. And forget about any privacy. The cells are massively overcrowded, with reports of cells built for 10 people holding as many as 100 people. And with overcrowding comes health risks of the worst kind. Like all overcrowded prisons, the facility is known for being a petri dish of diseases, including tuberculosis, which can be deadly if not treated properly. Making it worse, medical treatments for inmates are limited and hard to come by. The place is reportedly infested with rats and insects, and it's common to have inmates die there, including high-profile ones. Attorney Sergei Magnitsky died there in 2009 while being held without trial after exposing Russian corruption. And the thing people might need to fear the most in here is the guards. There are ample records of beatings and torture by guards, which is widespread in the Russian prison system. This is commonly just abuse by power-tripping screws. But remember, many people here are still awaiting trial, which means Russia has a vested interest in getting them to confess. And that means this might just be your first stop in the Russian prison system, but it could be your last, as the Russian government has an extremely high conviction rate, and they'll get those confessions by any means necessary. But if you survive this prison, what comes next might be much worse. Number 3. Once you're convicted in Russia, your situation is going to change a lot. Many people who are convicted are sent to labor camps, heavily modeled on the gulags pioneered by Stalin. But for high-profile inmates and the most dangerous, they're headed about as far away as they can get. They're headed to the Black Dolphin Prison, near the border with Kazakhstan, a remote fortress saved for the worst of the worst, or those Russia truly wants to make an example of. And those who have experienced it have described it as a true no man's land. Serial killers, spies, and enemies of the state are brought to the closest thing Russia has to a true supermax prison, spending almost their entire day in total isolation. And even when they're removed from their cells, they don't get to enjoy the outside. One of the most dehumanizing parts of the experience here is the fact that inmates are blindfolded when they're moved. This is so the inmates can't get the layout of the prison into their heads, and they know very little of the sprawling complex should they try an escape attempt. But even if they did escape, that's not likely to last for long. One of the most effective ways to prevent prisoner escapes is location. And building your prison in a massive desert hundreds of miles from a major city certainly takes care of those opportunities. The prison is known for being one of the harshest in the Russian system, as its inmates are not going anywhere. There are few, if any, rehabilitative programs here. The inmates are forced to keep an extremely strict daily schedule that gives them little time for planning or doing anything that might make trouble. And if anyone steps a toe out of line, the guards are waiting. Torture isn't just common at Black Dolphin Prison, it's a way of life. For those who've experienced the prison firsthand and lived to tell about it, they have terrifying tales. The only time they're out of their cells are for 90 minutes of exercise in a cage while their cells are searched. When in their cells for the rest of the time, they are forbidden from sitting or lying on their bunks and are constantly tested through surveillance to ensure they're paying attention. The only meal available is soup, which is served 4 times a day, and humiliation is a way of life. One of the most signature elements of the Black Dolphin Prison is how the inmates are escorted. Not only are they blindfolded, they are bent over at the waist while the officer leads them by handcuffed hands. Not only can't the prisoners see, they are totally dependent on the guard, and reports of conditions here are few and far between because no one leaves Black Dolphin Prison. Every single person here is serving life imprisonment, and in Russia, parole isn't happening. Number 2. In the early 2000s, El Salvador was rife with crime and gang activity. This led to the rise of eccentric right-wing President Nayib Bukele, who gained popularity by vowing a crackdown on crime. As part of it, he built a massive new prison in the country, CECOT, a huge facility designed to hold up to 40,000 inmates. The vast majority of residents are gang members, with many of them being held for extended terms without trial and being forced to do hard labor. The population was largely made up of local criminals until recently, because CECOT might have just become the most well-known prison in the world. When the new U.S. administration took office in January 2025, it vowed to crack down on undocumented immigrants in the U.S., especially those in gangs. But that would require a massive increase in U.S. prison capacity, which they didn't have. So the two leaders of the U.S. and El Salvador came up with an unconventional solution. They would just send the arrested people, many of them Venezuelans, to El Salvador instead. This was done without trial and condemned as human trafficking. But the battle over legality wears on in the courts. But for those who were ferried to CECOT, they found themselves in a harsh new world. The massive prison is made up of huge cells designed to hold up to 156 inmates and contain hard metal bunks and only 2 toilets. The cells are lit 24 hours a day, making sleep very hard to come by, and the only entertainment provided is a pair of Bibles. For any inmate who steps out of line, solitary confinement awaits. Pitch-black cells with only a small hole in the ceiling and a concrete bed. Terms of up to 15 days in solitary are common for troublemakers, and there are plenty of troublemakers. The prison is mostly filled with gang members, but the guards may be the ones to fear the most. CECOT has been referred to as a black hole of human rights for many reasons. The inmates are overcrowded and the prison is badly managed. How do you keep tabs on 156 prisoners in a single cell? That means the gang members often torment the non-violent inmates. The prison is also one of the most secure in the world from the outside, which means standard amenities like outside recreation and family visits simply aren't a thing here. And this is made worse by the fact that very few of the inmates in CECOT are even convicted criminals. But the architects aren't slowing down at all. Many see CECOT as a new model to follow. The mega prison might be hell on earth for those inside, but crime has dropped massively in El Salvador since it was opened. President Bukele has pushed back hard against condemnations, even boasting that he'll be opening a new prison for white-collar criminals based on the same model. And the U.S. has announced that it wants to start shipping convicted U.S. citizens to CECOT. After all, they have the space. But all these prisons have one thing in common that this next one doesn't. You don't actually have to be sent there. Number 1. You wake up. You praise the leader. You work some more. You get a little food, just enough to stay alive. You get whatever sleep you can. The next day will be more of the same, just like every day before it. You're a prisoner of Kechon Internment Camp, the most brutal prison camp in North Korea, better known as Camp 14. It's the most feared destination for criminals and enemies of the state in the Hermit Kingdom. But for you, it's all you've ever known, because you were born here, and many of the inmates locked up inside are condemned from the moment of their birth. North Korea practices a form of generational slave labor for political prisoners, where those who cross the Kim family are sentenced to life imprisonment in a labor camp, and so are their descendants. Under Juche, those who engage in anti-government activities are considered unredeemable, and so are their entire families, and any family member who is born after. It doesn't take much to get sent here. Criticizing the government can do it, and so can failing badly enough at your job. And while you're here, you better find a way to excel. Everyone in the camp has a job as soon as they're able, with most working in the factories creating textiles and ceramics. This is a hard, back-breaking job, but it might be the better alternative to the other duty of working in the coal mines. While schools do exist within the camp, work duty starts for children as young as 11, meaning that these kids rarely see their parents. The regular work shift in the camp is from 5:30 a.m. to midnight. It's a monotonous, hard existence with no escape, and even surviving day to day is difficult. The nutrition situation in the camp is one of the worst in the world. Inmates are fed little more than salted cabbage and corn. This results in all prisoners being starved and losing their teeth due to malnutrition. Desperate for protein, many prisoners resort to scrounging for rats, snakes, and insects. Not only does this make them vulnerable to food poisoning and deadly diseases, but it's illegal. Inmates must gain permission from the guards to eat anything but the standard prison meal, and any violation can have extremely harsh consequences. And death lies around every corner. There are only a few witnesses from this terrifying prison camp. Sin Dong-hyuk, an escapee from the prison who wrote a biography about his experiences, he reported being tortured and witnessing executions, although some elements of his story were later called into question. Kim Young spent 13 years at the camp and claimed to have seen numerous executions. All the other prisons seem intended to contain prisoners, while this one is designed to work them to death, if it doesn't kill them another way first. Want to know what life is like in one of the most laid-back prisons in the world? Check out what happens in the first 24 hours in Japanese prison, or watch this video instead.